women. According to Dr. Joe Mama from Stanford University, apparently 20,000 years ago, women just kind of sprung up out of the ground, and the cavemen at the time just saw them, and he went, ooga booga booga booga, ooga booga booga, and here we are today. How'd it happen? How'd it happen, huh? Huh? How President Trump, how did it have gone from being seen as the lesser than of men and not having any rights whatsoever to being on equal standing and having the equal opportunities as men? They went from that to that. When something happened in between, I like women, you like women, not all of them, some of them suck. Other ones are pretty cool. Some of them are just plain scary. But the bottom line is, there was a period of time in which women's rights were transformed and in which women were able to get to where they are today. No, we're not talking about the 80s and the movement for women's suffrage. Instead, today we're going to be talking about the ancient regime, the 17th and 18th centuries, a time where social standing and cultural aspects were what led to women having rights today, and what gave them the very little rights that they had at the time. I'm Danish Kadri, and this is it's the expectations and responsibilities of men. That's what this is. That's exactly what this is, right? 다들 말해봐도 대체 어디까지가 우리 한계. 남들이 어디까지 가냐 묻는 단계. 대답은 계속 변한 고철이 만들어내 위치로 대신답해 끝이 어딘지 몰라 끝까지 갈 수밖에. 불가능하단 말들 앞에 서로를 더 붙잡고 전부 헤쳐나가게. 눈앞이 막막해도 달려나가. 수많은 싸움 절대 기권 안에 끝을 봐. Responsibilities of women in the ancient regime. The social mores and folkways. So the mores and folkways, well, what is a more? What is a folkway? Well, I'm glad you asked. A more is like, it's kind of like manners. It's kind of, it's a code if you break, you look silly, or if you look immature. Like say farting really loudly or burping really loudly, that's breaking a more. It's kind of like manners, and that changes time to time. Folkway, on the other hand, is big no. Big if you do so, there will be actual consequences. It doesn't necessarily have to be a law or anything. It's just like, you can't really it's not really seen as something you can get away with doing. Like heresy and whatnot would be seen as like a folkway during this time period. Anyway, so the mores were as follows. So housewives were responsible for their households. That was a more. You couldn't really break that. If you were a wife that wasn't taking care of her home, that was weird. Like, why weren't you doing that? You wouldn't really be accepted in society if you were doing that. And then there was also, women had to stay within their own domestic sphere of influence. What does that mean? Well, their domestic sphere of influence was their household. That's really the only thing that they had control over. It was their household, and they really had to pay attention to that. Women in lower class had high birth rates. That was the norm. That was kind of the more of the time. It was, you have to have a lot of kids. Why? Because there's a high mortality rate. A lot of kids died so earlier on in their birth, so you would probably want to have a lot of kids to see how many survive. You're kind of playing the guessing game with this one. It's like Russian roulette, except you're missing more bullets than you have, or it's like 50-50 or whatever. But whatever, it's kind of like Russian roulette. Upper class women ran large households and workers, and the estate, the entirety of the estate, when the spouse was gone, say there was war or something, or in the case of France, if Louis XIV was having his little parlay at Versailles, women would kind of be responsible for taking care of the estate at the time. Most of the time at Versailles, the wife would go with them. Back, if you were a noble during this time period, your estate had a lot of workers, and a lot of people were there to take care of stuff. You had a nurse, a lot of servants and stuff. You had and each of your servants or workers would have their own specific roles. You'd have the butler who would kind of like make sure everything's going fine, and then the women would really be making sure that the whole entire household is running smoothly, that the kitchen wench is doing her job, and the milkmaid's doing her job, and whatever, so and so. And they basically work through other people in the house that would be doing a lot of the dirty work, and they try to avoid having to go one-on-one with their servants. So upper class women had to run their large households. That was the moray at the time. You kind of had to. That was your responsibility. Folkways. Women can't really speak up this time. You know, you can't really have any revolutionary thought. Women can't really take an active part in politics. They can take a indirect, inactive part, like say Catherine de Medici with working through her sons. You would have to work through some sort of patriarchal figure, though, like your father, your son, or your husband, if you wanted any political influence at the time. But if you wanted to have any revolutionary change, or if you had any new ideas, or if you want to be an intellectual, women couldn't really do that during this time. And if you were, there was a folk way at this time. If you spoke up and were revolutionary, and you would usually get burned at the stake or hung, and any form of execution, you just kind of get killed for it. Whatever, it is what it is. Also, there was uber modesty. You don't want to like be a slut, because sluts kind of got killed. Whores got killed during this time. So yeah, there's that too. Legal status. When it came to the lower class, there was little to none legal status when it came to women. They really had none because they didn't have property. They didn't have anything that should allow them to have any sort of rights. So they really had rights. Women were considered minors and they were under the protection and guardianship of their patriarchal overlords, their husbands or fathers or sons, by law. And by law, husband or father was to care for their spouse and children. Like, that's what they had to do. So it's kind of like a two-way street. It wasn't just like, okay, you're the property of your overlord, of your patriarchal overlord, and that's it. No, they had to take care of you by law. Some women could work. It's like estate management for upper class, and then the menial labor for the lower class. So like when it came to running the family business or working in a sweatshop and stuff like that, things like that. But you could only do it with your husband or father's permission. Obviously, anything you wanted to do, you had to go through some sort of patriarchal figure to do during this time. Women couldn't do anything on their own. They had to go through guys. So they lived in a patriarchal system. They couldn't go to university, but like the thing is with upper class women, they have to have been educated somehow because, you know, they're upper class or whatever, they have to be. So they were tutored privately, that's different. But normal women, they couldn't get any education. When it came to the church, you could be a nun, but in England, after old Charlie Boy got killed in 1649, they made a break for it. They made a run for it, and you couldn't really be a nun anymore because Catholicism is it's a weird subject. All right, property rights. So the lower class had none because lower class women, lower class, didn't have property, so obviously no property rights. But there was a massive change during this time period, and that change was that women can technically own property only if their father or their husband willed them directly to own their property. However, if they got married or if they were married, the husband takes over the estate. The husband owns the property because a woman is a minor, technically. So some male figure had to be in charge. Once your land's gone, no take-backsies, sucks to suck. Wow, I wish I wasn't a woman during this time period. Social obligations. So you had to take care of your children and you had to educate them. That was just your job. That was your social obligation at the time period. Here in the picture, you see Catherine de Medici and her beautiful kids. Beautiful is a relative term. So technically, they're property men, so they can't own anything. It's not a thing, whatever. They had to be submissive to their spouses, i.e. the Protestant craze at the time, because they were very literal about the Bible, and if they found like one verse in the Bible that said, oh yeah, women are less than men, or whatever, women are less than men, that's what it is. That's just because of the Protestant craze happening during this time. The other social obligation they had was to give proper moral guidance to their children and their husbands, and this was seen as their sign of purity. Women were seen as the heralds of morality. They were seen as the official moral guides to their patriarchal overlords. Also, modesty. You gotta be modest. Like, you can't just like walk out without having like 12 layers of linen underneath. We'll talk about fashion in a bit. And then, yeah, Catherine de Medici is an example of fulfilling all her social obligations. But, yeah, she's a pretty cool figure. All right, other skills. So they're super good at household tasks because they were really responsible for the household, so they had to do that. So they're good at such tasks as laundry, cleaning, cooking, sandwich making, stuff that translates to today as well. They had to obey their patriarchal overlords. So if they're told to do tasks, they had to do them. For example, If their husband says, you gotta work on the farm, they're working on the farm. If their husband says, get a job, she gets a job. You gotta work in the family business, gotta work in the family business. And on the right, you see like a butcher shop and a sewing thing. Women were good at sewing, so they would sew. And then if your husband's like, hey, yo, you gotta help chop up the meat in the shop. So they chop up the meat in the shop. They were bakers, brewers, sewers, all kinds of stuff. Obviously, only with their patriarchal overseers' permission. Oh yeah, and also they were really good at making clothes and stuff. I wonder why. Probably has nothing to do with the fact that they were at home all the time. Fashion. They wore frocks and frilly dresses. Fashion during this time period was centered around modesty. You got to wear a lot of clothes. Like there's lots of cloth, lots of linen, lots of kind of cloth on top of cloth on top of cloth. There was multiple undershirt game going on over there. Later on, towards the end of this time period, when Queen Victoria comes to rule, you start the Victorian era, and that's when corsets really start going on. Corsets originally started as just like a top hard piece that you would pull with strings, right? But the way in which corsets were being worn changed drastically by the end of this time period. They became a nightmare to wear because women were so focused on their bust and trying to squeeze in their center or their core of their body. What they end up doing is they would pull the string so hard and they would tie it down so tightly it would become difficult to breathe. They would be squeezing their internal organs. That's why when you watch a lot of Victorian era plays or movies in Hollywood, women tend to like pass out or faint very easily when they get shocked. Why? Because their lungs are literally being crushed. They don't have room for air. So, yeah, corsets were a nightmare. Also, they wore caps. I mean, they just did, because, like, I guess that protected them from lice or whatever, because, guys wore wigs, so I guess women wore caps. All right, social standards derived from clothing. So, because of the Protestant craze and the Puritans being Puritany, the body was bad because sex was evil, so showing flesh was seen as a sin. And this is the Protestant ideology, again, with the whole entire idea of Europe getting pretty Protestant, right? You had that going around during this time period, the whole idea of body bad because sex evil. And that's kind of the argument they used against Catholics at the time because they saw Catholics as sex-crazed maniacs. So this is something they used to demonize Catholics even more by saying, hey, layers of clothes if you want to live in society. A lot of the outfits women specifically wore during this time, they reflected their trade or employment. Like you could see the beer girl on the right, wearing a beer girl dress, you had aprons and such, and your clothes would typically depict what kind of trade or employment you were in.
Hello.
Hey, Azia.
Hi, Danish. What's up?
So, I'm doing a project for AP Euro about women, and you're a woman, right?
Wait, what?
You're a woman, right?
Yes.
So what's it like being a woman?
Stressful.
Cool. Yeah.